As the chairman of the elections committee, I've been focused on restoring confidence in our elections. We have a crisis of confidence in our elections. And one of the areas where I've been really focused is on increasing transparency. And sometimes that just means having a conversation, hearing people out when they're, I've tried to make my committee room into a platform where folks can come in, and if they have concerns, they're not going to be shouted down. They're not going to be called tinfoil hat wearing kooks or accused of trying to steal elections. They're going to be heard out. And I might not agree with them. And if I don't agree with them, I'll push back. But I guarantee you, if I do agree with them, the other side doesn't. And they'll push back. But it's a conversation instead of a shouting match, which is what we've been having on elections for the last 5 years. But sometimes transparency requires actual legislation. And one of the areas that I've been trying to get a bill passed for the last 3 years is on the 3-day grace period. A lot of people don't know this, but for 3 days after the election is already over and it's election night and we close the polls, clerks were required to keep taking ballots, keep accepting mail-in ballots for 3 days after the election. And to me, that is a threat to voter confidence, because if I go to bed on election night and this person won, and then the next day this person won, and then the next day this person won again, and the next day maybe the other person won, that is not conducive to voter confidence. That's the opposite of restoring voter confidence. And so for the last 3 years, I've been trying to pass a law to make us like 32 other states that stop taking ballots at 7 p.m. on election night, which makes eminent good sense to me. For 2 of those years, the governor vetoed our bill. And unfortunately, some of the rural Republicans, they sided with the governor on the bill because their concern was, well, the mail's too slow in rural areas. We need those extra days. But as part of my job as the chairman of the elections committee, I go all over the state. Even before I was a candidate for Secretary of State, I go all over the state talking to clerks, election officers, the people who actually run the elections. Because the Secretary of State doesn't run the elections. He's the chief elections officer, but the clerks run the elections. It's a bottom-up system. And what I would repeatedly hear from the clerks is the ballots that show up during this 3-day grace period, a lot of them can't be counted, because in the law, it says that in order to be counted, the ballot has to have a postmark showing that it was cast before election day, right, or on election day at the latest. And if it doesn't have a postmark, you can't count it, because you don't know if it was voted before or after election day. And so I knew for those 2 years that this was happening, but I didn't have any data. And of course, the Democrats eat you alive, because so you don't have any proof this is happening. You just want to suppress the vote, you racist, right? And so I asked the Secretary of State's office to actually ask the clerks, could you please, during an election, hold the clerks and ask them how many of the ballots they're not able to count because they come without a postmark. And they did that this last election. And in August 2024, in the primary election, 1 in 3 ballots that showed up in a clerk's office during that 3-day grace period couldn't be counted because they didn't have a postmark. Because the post office isn't required to do that postmark. The postmark's to cancel a stamp. And if a ballot comes in without a stamp, which many of them do, and they still get counted, they don't get postmarked, and so they don't get counted. And so now, this last session, we finally had the data to go with our arguments about the 3-day grace period, and we were able to repeal it. The governor, of course, vetoed, and this year, finally, after 3 years of trying, we were able to override the veto. So it's a law right now in the state of Kansas. However, there's this group, and they hate when I call them this, so I call them this all the time, the Axis of Ballot Harvesting, the ACLU, Loud Life, Appleseed, League of Women Voters, these groups that sue us every time we do something to try to improve election security and make ballot harvesting harder, they sue us. And so they have sued us on this law. And of course, they don't sue us in federal court, because in the federal court, we might get a fair shake. So they sue us on state issues. And as an aside, in the state of Mississippi, they had a 3-day grace period, and somebody sued that law in federal court, and a federal judge, the Fifth Circuit federal judge, said the 3-day grace period is unconstitutional because in federal statute, it says that election day is the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November, so you can't add days. He said it's unconstitutional. But that only applies to Mississippi, Texas, and Louisiana, which are the states in that circuit that have the 3-day grace period. And then, ironically, the Mississippi Secretary of State, who's very conservative, he appealed that decision so that he could get it up to the Supreme Court so they could issue the decision so it would apply to the whole country. But while we're waiting on that, the Axis of Ballot Harvesting is suing our law in state court because they want to get it to the state Supreme Court, which is very far left, so that they can get a decision. And, this is crazy. This is how bad they are. They didn't just sue to repeal the law. They want the judge to impose a 7-day grace period because 3 days isn't enough either. So they're hoping that their case will get to court before you get the ability to vote on a constitutional amendment to reform our Supreme Court and get constitutional conservatives in our Supreme Court. So that vote is vitally, vitally important to securing your vote, to securing your election. You going and voting in August 2026 to give the people the right to select their Supreme Court justices is vitally important.